So here we have this week's Parshat Matos Masei, and I titled today's class, There's Always a Backstory. And I think this is just so important in understanding relationships, our connections with other people, whether it's spouses, whether it's friends, whether it's children. And I really thought that this message really spoke to me this week. And that's how it is, anything that I really like in this week's Parsha, I try to give over. So the last few Torah portions we've been recording the Jewish people's steady advancement through the wilderness towards the promised land, towards the land of Israel. And in this week's Parshat Matos, the Jewish people find themselves at the threshold of Eretz Yisrael, in the freshly conquered territory, just east of the Jordan River. So they're on the east bank of the Jordan River. And before the Jewish people are ready to move on westward, right, something very interesting happens. And this is a story you may be familiar with, a story that we read about in this week's Parsha. Two tribes, the tribes of Gad and the tribe of Reuven, who own an enormous amount of cattle and an enormous amount of livestock, they go over to Moshe and they ask Moshe, would it be okay if we be given these territories, the land to the east of the Jordan River, because this land is really prime land for pasture for our cattle. So instead of giving us our allotment in land of Eretz Yisrael, which lay to the west of the Jordan, these two shvatim, these two tribes, asked Moshe if they can occupy the land right that they currently are in to the east. And it seems like a perfect match, perfectly suitable. And this is what the Torah relates in this week's Parsha. Now, when the two shvatim approach Moshe with this request, the Torah says that Moshe becomes extremely upset. And Moshe does something very uncharacteristic of him. And he starts to give these two tribes a sermon, what we would call in Hebrew a chelek, like a long speech, a long, fiery, dramatic speech that lasts 10 psukim, 10 verses in the Parsha. We know that Torah is very concise and very precise. So 10 complete verses is a pretty long stretch for the Torah. But Moshe goes on and on and on, explaining why he thinks this is so wrong of the tribes of Gad and Reuven. And what I did was I clipped Moshe's words directly from this week's Parsha. So I'll put it up on the next slide and I'll read it in English. Moshe said to the descendants of Gad and the descendants of Reuven, shall your brethren go to war while you stay here? Why do you discourage the children of Israel from crossing over to the land which the Lord has given them? Behold, you have now risen in place of your fathers as a society of sinful people to add to the wrathful anger of the Lord against Israel. If you turn away from following him, he will leave you in the desert again. He will leave you in the desert again, and you will destroy this entire people. So Moshe minces no words, and he gets really detailed with the Jewish people, with these two tribes. And Moshe reminds them, and he says, 40 years earlier, the people of Israel were preparing to enter the land of Israel. And what happened? We sent the spies, the 12 spies to scout out the land, and the 10 of the 12 spies came back with a negative report. And because of their negative report, the entire rest of the nation has been in the desert for 40 years. And now this new generation prepared to accept the gift and the challenge of the promised land. Now you, Reuben and Gad, you are repeating the sin of the spies, because you, like your grandparents, you are about to dissuade or plant, you know, a seed in the Jewish people's, a seed of maybe not, questioning or not giving them confidence to go into the Eretz Yisrael. And according to Moshe's words, you will destroy this entire nation. And Moshe doesn't stop there. He continues with his rebuke, and he says, what you are doing is not only continuing the sin of the spies, but what you are doing is an act of betrayal. Because now the Jewish people need you. We're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. They need you to help fight the wars and to conquer the land. And you're going to opt out? You're copping out now? You're abandoning your brothers to fight on their own? And Moshe goes on and on. He does it, and Moshe was very, very upset. And what's unbelievable, and just from a psychological perspective, okay, put yourself in Reuben and Gad's position. They are getting rebuked. They're getting criticized. What does it feel like to get criticized? I mean, it doesn't feel nice. But what's amazing here is that Reuben and Gad accepted Moshe's rebuke with grace. They remained silent, respectfully silent, and they listened, which, by the way, is so hard to do when someone's criticizing you. Trust me, I know. They remained silent and they listened. And finally, after Moshe was finished with his rebuke, they spoke up because they wanted to clarify their position with Moshe. So what do they say? I'm going to bring on the next slide the words of Reuben and Gad. They approached him, meaning they approached Moshe, and they said, we will build sheepfolds for our livestock here and cities for our children. We will then arm ourselves quickly and go before the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And we shall not return to our homes until each of the children of Israel has taken possession of his inheritance. So, in other words, Reuben and Gad are proposing that they are in no way are looking to cop out of their responsibility towards their fellow brothers and sisters. They will go to battle. They will join their brothers and sisters in war in Israel. They do not want to settle the land of Israel on the West Bank, but they are fully prepared to enter it with their brothers and sisters to help conquer it and settle it. And only then, when the rest of the tribes are settled, will they return to east of Jordan to rejoin their families and to settle their own land. And what does Moshe say? Moshe relaxes. You understand? He says, if that's the case, then this idea isn't so bad after all. So Moshe changes his tone. He accepts their request. And he says, as long as you fulfill your condition, then no problem. You can remain here on the east of the Jordan River. So this is the narrative in this week's Parsha. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe has several questions on this narrative, and many commentaries question this narrative. What exactly was going on here? What I want to focus on today is just one idea of the Rebbe, one very, very relevant idea of the Rebbe. The Rebbe asked two very interesting questions Questions that you may have been wondering yourself as you listen to this story or as you read the story in the Parsha. Reuben and Gad's intentions, it seems, were really very pure intentions. They never had in mind to abandon their brothers going to war. They clarified to Moshe, oh, don't worry. We are not going to settle in the east of Jordan until our brothers and sisters are settled in the land of Israel. So their intentions were good and were pure. Then how then did Moshe misread them so deeply? Why did Moshe grow so angry with them? And Moshe goes on to give them a 10-verse lecture, a 10-verse sermon. Like Moshe didn't think about first inquiring, like what are your intentions before coming down so hard on them? That we know Moshe is a tzaddik. We know Moshe is the Raya Neman. He's the faithful shepherd of the Jewish people. So there's something we're missing here from the story. There's the backstory we're missing. So before we get to that answer, the Rebbe asks something else. So number one, how did Moshe misread them so deeply? Why did Moshe get so upset at them? If their intentions were good, were pure. And number two, and this seems very important, right? We know that Hashem wanted the Jewish people to settle the land to the east of the Jordan as well as the west of the Jordan. So these people, we know that Hashem wanted to give the Jewish people the land at the west of the Jordan. And two Shvatim, two tribes, decide that they want to remain on the east of the Jordan. Like, who gave these two tribes the right to redefine the plan, to rewrite the map of Israel and choose the east instead of the west? And then why did Moshe consent to their request? Like, two Shvatim, two tribes are going to widen our borders? This is not what Hashem had in mind in the beginning. So why did Moshe consent to this request? And so the Rebbe explains as follows. And the Rebbe says that in any story, there is always a subplot, right? We know that whatever is relevant to us in Torah is written, is recorded, but there is so much of the biblical plots that we don't know explicitly, that's not explicitly shared in the Torah. Important details that we have to search for, clues from the Medrash, from the Gemara, from different sources. There's a subplot here, and this narrative is no exception. We get the sense from the Torah that there is something else driving these two Shvatim to request to settle the land east of the Jordan. There's something deeper here. It can't just be it's all about their cattle and their livestock. What is it? What is the backstory here, the Rebbe asked? What was the driving factor? Why Reuben and Gad wanted to settle the land east of Eretz Israel? And I just want to say that as a parent, I believe this premise is true as I raise my children as well. When my child is misbehaving or displaying, unusual behavior in any way, I can I can read it as I see it, or I could ask myself, what is going on here that may be causing the child to act this way? What's the backstory here? What is this child feeling? What is this child needing from me? Is this child hungry? Is this child tired? Is this child not feeling good? And this is what the Rebbe says we have to ask ourselves in this story as well. What was going on behind the scenes? And there's really, in this week's Parsha, the Torah doesn't give us any hint. There's no way of knowing. Like, we are left completely in the dark until Moshe is about to leave this world. In the very last Parsha, in Devarim, very last section of the Torah, of the Chumash, Parshat Devarim, just moments before Moshe is going to pass away, Moshe speaks to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And his words to the tribe of Gad are very, very interesting. And if we observe the words that Moshe spoke to God, we get a clue. We get a clue on what's going on here. I realize now that I didn't copy the words onto the PowerPoint, so let me do it now because this is actually very important. So you'll bear with me. What does Moshe tell this tribe of Gad? He, Gad, chose the first portion of land available, for that is where the lawgiver's plot is hidden. He chose the first portion of land available, for that is where the lawgiver's plot is hidden. What is hidden in these cryptic words? Here is where we are exposed to the true reason behind Gad and Reuben's insistence to settle the territory to the east of the Jordan River. Who was their lawgiver? Their lawgiver was Moshe. Moshe, the lawgiver, was destined to die right here in the east of the Jordan River. Moshe would never cross the Jordan and enter the land of Israel. And the Shevet of Gad and Reuben wished to remain with Moshe. And I actually get very emotional just saying this. These two tribes did not want to let Moshe's burial remain isolated in the plains of Moab without the presence of even a single Jew. And they cried to Moshe, and they said, "Don't take us across the Jordan." What was this cry? What was going on underneath the Baba Mice about cattle? They did not want to be separate from their Rebbe. If Moshe was not destined to cross the river, they did not want to cross the river either. So it wasn't about farming and real estate and cattle. That was like the cover up. That was like when the kids fetchy, but really they're hungry. These were neshamais that were so deeply attached to their Rebbe, and they were determined to spend their lives near the resting place of Moshe. Now, Moshe clearly did not anticipate such a movement, right? He did not anticipate this happening. So when the members of the tribe of Gad and Reuben approached Moshe with their request, you understand now, they didn't feel comfortable communicating the entire truth. They didn't want to talk directly to Moshe about his own death and about his gravesite. So instead, they like discussed like secondary motivations, right? Like it wasn't, they were still being honest, but it was secondary. Yeah, the cattle and the livestock and the fertile air. Eretz Yisrael was also fertile land. Let's not, get carried away. And Moshe, when he heard their argument, felt, right, sensed that there, this wasn't the entire story, right? He suspected them maybe of plotting a scheme to escape the responsibility of going to the land of Israel. Moshe knew that this wasn't the full truth, but he didn't know what the truth was. And therefore Moshe would rebuke them. He would rebuke them very severely. But here we see, and this is not surprising, we see that they accepted Moshe's words with such grace. And the fact that they received Moshe's words with such grace, so much dignity, makes it clear to us that they were not upset by Moshe's words to them. Why not? Because they were not being straightforward with Moshe themselves. And most of all, this was not about them. It's not about their ego. It was about their selfless love and dedication to Moshe. And even though Moshe was upset at them at that moment, because Moshe wasn't sure what their plot, what their idea was, God and Reuven demonstrated how deeply their connection, how strong their connection was to their leader, to Moshe. And Moshe agreed to fulfill their request. Why? Because once he understood their request, once Reuven and God clarified what they mean, it was a whole different story. And he himself, Moshe himself, felt, I can't tear myself away from the people that I dedicated my life to. And if his people reciprocated the love that he showered upon them, he's not going to be the one to expel them from his midst, right? And at the very last moments before Moshe passes away, he praises God for this deeply loving choice. So if this is the case, and if Reuven and God had the best of intentions, and they didn't want to be separated from their Rebbe, and that's why they asked to remain on the east of the Jordan. And the Rebbe asked them, why do so many commentaries criticize Reuven and Gad for their decision to remain on the east of the Jordan? Why are they criticized? It actually says in Proverbs, it says in the Medrash, that if an inheritance is seized hastily in the beginning, its end will not be blessed. And the Medrash applies this to the two tribes who took the territory to the east of the Jordan. So they hastily seized that land. And then centuries later, when the Jewish people were exiled from Eretz Yisrael, it's these two tribes, Reuben and Gad, who were the first to be exiled from their land. Why? Why are they criticized? Why are they given such a hard time if really their intentions were so pure? And this is really a very deep lesson and deep message for us, a deep message for us about what it means to connect to someone we've lost, what it means to connect to someone who's passed away. As deeply moving and as noble as Gad and Reuben's intentions were, Chassidus explains that there was something hasty about their choice. There was something immature about their choice. There was something short-sighted about their choice. Yes, Gad and Reuben could not abandon Moshe's burial place. They were determined to remain in close proximity to Moshe's body. But what they failed to realize in the moment of haste was that Moshe's true presence would not remain interred in the land, in the earth, right where it is, in the plains of Maya, but Moshe would continue to live on forever. It was Moshe's vision would continue to live, Moshe's ideas, Moshe's teachings. And Moshe's vision was that the Jewish people fulfill their mandate from Hashem to enter into the land of Israel, to settle it, to transform it, to take the physical landscape of the land and create a place for Hashem in Eretz Yisrael. Moshe's life, Moshe's whole world embodied a way of looking at the world that was not defined by a specific place, by a specific time, by a specific, time or place. But as long as the truth would live in the hearts of the people dedicated to Moshe would remain alive. So yes, to be in the physical presence of Moshe is very great. But do you know what's even greater? Even greater to leave his presence and to fulfill his mission to settle the Holy Land. And this is the message of this Parshat. I took two messages from this reading. Number one, there's always a backstory. Sometimes we need to take the time to clue ourselves into what really is going on. What is the other person feeling? What am I feeling? I'm upset about something. I'm upset about being stuck in traffic. But what is there something underlying that's really at the core of my upset feeling? Is it there's something else going on that's making me feel unsettled, that's making me feel stressed? We learn this from this parsha. And we also learn from this parsha that a neshama of somebody who passed, especially of a rebbe, of a tzaddik, is infinite. It's not defined by a certain place at a certain time. We can connect to Moshe, we can connect to our neshama anywhere and anytime, because a neshama lives on. It lives on through their spirit, through their teachings, and it goes for every person, anyone, the neshama of anyone that we've lost. We don't need to be at their gravestone to connect to them. We can be anywhere, at any time, at any place. And this is what Gad and Reuven, this is what they missed. This detail is what they missed. And in a way they weren't wrong. And yes, they remain there. And it says that when Mashiach comes, the borders of Eretz Yisrael will grow to include the land that was settled by Reuben and Gad. But now, in our lifetime, before Mashiach comes, we need to know that a deeper way of connecting to Moshe, a deeper way of connecting to the Rebbe, not to go to the Eihel every day where the Rebbe is interred, but to bring the Rebbe's message and to bring the Rebbe's teachings, to bring the Rebbe's love and the Rebbe's energy out into the world, out into every place and cranny that we can find ourselves in Bronxville, in Sedona, Arizona, in Jacksonville, Florida, and in Charlotte, North Carolina. That is really how a Rebbe lives on. And with this we'll conclude. If you have any questions, you could unmute yourself.